remarks. Take the recent speech by Comrade Ronnie that were from the era of colonialism, and be based on the fact of Resolution 1541 of the UN General Assembly on decolonization of Africa and the other territories. Please be precisely, because that resolution itself, it doesn't talk anything about economic freedom. You spoke about political settlement. We still have a problem on the issues of we do not control our means of production. What is the way forward on this matter? Rather than blaming neoliberalism that we have entrenched in our constitution. Our constitution is more liberal than the Canadian constitution itself.
Black t-shirt.
So my name is Rob Rees, actually.
Rob.
Thanks. Look, just briefly, I think this is a much longer discussion, but I never heard much in your paper about the role of ordinary people. We talked about the state disciplining capital, but what's the role of ordinary people, or the organized working class, or some other vision? I did also hear you speak about sort of development as a pacting of elites, which sort of presumably is just trade union leaders and whatever's left of the Communist Party or whatever. Can you speak a bit about ordinary people? I've been finding it a bit absent, actually, throughout the day. Ronnie Kasrils mentions, and I think that's the way forward. Unfortunately, that tradition has been dismantled, of hope and confidence. I tried to speak about it earlier, as a stealing of the hope and confidence and strength of the working class in favor of leaders, even if they're Mandela. What kind of organization are we building when one guy comes back and, okay. And I say this with all respect, because it's not easy to talk about Mandela. But in fact, the guys in the union, when I was there, when he came back from London with the speech about saying, and he actually said, this was a quote in the newspapers and you will know better, nationalisation was never the policy of the ANC. And the guys in the union I was working with, they thought I was a fucking ultra-left, and they didn't believe me. Madiba would never say that. So the myth of leadership and the taking away of the power of the working class, it wasn't Mandela that brought, with respect, and I say this with great respect, really, please hear me. It wasn't Mandela that brought white capital to the table. It was the struggles of ordinary organized workers, and that power was stolen, demobilized. I'm saying this for the second time now. What kind of organization do we need to build where we don't allow some famous person to come along and just steal our power? Thanks.
Two quick ones. I just want to suggest Nicolas. Is he here? Oh, the prof is here. So. I just want to suggest that I think we need to bring more of the current and the former practitioners. It helps a lot in our conversations. The former president, Kasopat, Trevor Manuel has just declined. So you see, they are all available. They've got nothing to do, and I suspect they've got less grandchildren, so they won't decline. That's the first one. And I'm suggesting this very strongly and very seriously. The second one is the heterodox school. I really understand it far much better than the mainstream. And I think it's progressive, and I think more and more students should be exposed to the heterodox school. Unfortunately, I think it only exists at Vets. When you go to the University of Pretoria, where I studied, I don't think it's there. How about taking leaf or lesson from how, for instance, the Afrikaner intelligentsia actually built the South African state and South African, apartheid capitalism. But then the trick with that is, how do you make sure that progressive intelligentsia is embedded within within a society like ours, but at the same time, it keeps its autonomy so that itself is not captured, in the transition. So that for me is a very important issue. I mean, I'm worried every day when I see government and parastatals throughout, with the exception of the DTI, I think. They are always consulting with the mainstream economists. And I think that it's high time that those that are in the state and those that are in the academia, particularly in the progressive academia, begin to interact more to make sure that alternative voices emerge. Thanks.
Okay, I'll take Nicolas.
I think it's a very interesting paper in so many ways. And let me pick up from where he ended in terms of what the reading of the future might look like, and then pick up on the question of agency of the ordinary citizens of this particular country. I say this because if we go back to some of the discussions that we had this morning from Karl and others, the basic document of the land, which is the Constitution, seems to be contested in terms of the aspirations that it had and what it is delivering at the moment. And I'm asking if there is a contention around, is it delivering what it promises? And going back historically to the histories of the freedom of church and such other things, I think it's definitely a very strong role for the agency of citizens in not only challenging, but I think ensuring that there is sufficient disruptive forces so that it forces a new bargain, so to speak. And I would argue a new bargain that would require not just elites among themselves, but also a bargain that includes probably all the citizens of this country. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure where to start. Perhaps the thing we should say is that this is not the finalized paper, unlike the others which we presented earlier, which have been published in special issues. So it's still a work in progress, and therefore your comments and inputs are even more important, I'd say. I'm not sure where to start. Perhaps from Ronnie's feedback. Thank you very much for bringing back the two very key dimensions, I think, in this discussion. The first one is the centrality of violence, which is something that we have, of course, visited a lot this morning in Karl's paper, but also, again, in one of the interventions in the afternoon, Simon's intervention. And this is perhaps something that we need to factor in the paper a bit more than it currently is. But I agree with you that it's something that should be considered from a historical perspective and in order in particular to avoid any a posteriori judgmental position on decisions taken at the time by political actors. And this brings me to the second point that you raised, which is the historical dimension of this state-capital pact and in constant renegotiation, which I think is a very, very crucial angle from which to envisage the nature of the South African political state settlement. The other thing I wanted to respond to is the comment on the role of ordinary people and the stealing of hope from the working class. I think that the paper, perhaps in its current state, focuses essentially on the nature of the political settlements and therefore on the nature of forces involved in the political settlement, but in particular in the manner in which the political settlement, which was agreed upon in the early 1990s, has continued to condition the current situation. And there I agree with you that perhaps would benefit from a more detailed analysis of forces of change. But coming back to what I think Gavin raised earlier this afternoon, I think it's very important for us to perhaps unpack a bit more our understanding of this very complex rent-seeking system in order to better understand, in order first of all not to lump together a whole range of people who actually occupy very different positions in terms of their relationship to means of production, etc. But also to try and pinpoint much more precisely where forces of productive change could be identified, whether in terms of a class of capitalist, or productive capitalist, or whether in terms of an organized labor movement with the ability of pushing forward a progressive agenda.
Thanks, yeah. I mean, it's again some very exciting, well, I think it's been a really exciting day actually, a series of discussions which all resonate with each other. I just want to pick up, I suppose, on Rob's and Jacob's point, because I think it is the crucial, you know, most of what we've been talking about has been elite formation, elite I suppose fragmentation. So there's a kind of inherent loss of voice there. But I'm wondering whether, and this has been signaled before in the labour movement, I'm wondering whether a more active labour movement, more independent of the current settlement, and able to develop an alliance with manufacturing capital of some sort, might through struggles, through various kinds of disruption, including the broader, so to speak, the broader struggles of community protests, of mine workers' strikes, and so on, raise the cost, I suppose, of the current settlement so high that a new settlement comes onto the agenda, a new configuration comes onto the agenda. And it would depend on the balance of forces, of course, and that's, you know, some way down the road. It's really, I really wouldn't want to predict. I think all of these things can go in a number of different directions. But it does seem to me that what opens up the possibility of a new, a kind of a new hope, Rob, if you like, and a new hope not just of the working class, but a new hope for our country, arises out of these kinds of struggles and the kind of organizations, also the kind of strategies that Mark was talking about, the kind of the organization of people to also contest what is in the Constitution and try and push the Constitution to its own limits. Limits which we don't know what they are at this stage. So I think, for me what is important in the current period is that in a number of different fronts, there are ways in which the limits of the current configuration of forces are being tested. And the question is really what can emerge out of that. And I certainly wouldn't want to predict. I think it's unpredictable. But I suppose it's that kind of organizing, that kind of mobilizing, in combination with the sort of intellectual work that we're talking about today, and that Ronnie alluded to, that one might be able to see some change. It's very interesting to go back to 1922. A workers' strike, a white workers' strike, but nonetheless, it's a moment which consists both of a mass mobilization, the state, and capital, and it's settled in a particular way. And then there's 1994, it's settled in a particular way. Then there's Marikana. But the point about Marikana is it's not settled. The point is that the mine workers don't go back to work. They carry on fighting. So this is a new set of possibilities, I think.
Yeah, just very briefly to thank you for these comments. As Aurelia said, we are working on this paper, and I think a number of things that were said will be very useful, and we'll continue the discussion. Just two quick things I wanted to say. One is absolutely, just to build on what Mr. Karl was saying, and Ronnie, the idea of looking at how the particular political settlement post-1994 is, of course, an heir of earlier political settlements is very important. And David, I think you were asking about a particular kind of strategy that the Afrikaners pursued. And of course, I mean, what's interesting is that the way in which large-scale capital has negotiated with the the ANC and the alliance in the 1980s and 1990s was probably informed by what the Afrikaners were able to get 50 years earlier. In other words, the Afrikaners' ability to get both a large class of high-ranking capitalists formed through the state and through links with mining and energy production, but also to enforce very significant poverty reduction in the Afrikaner population, which of course had a huge cost, was something that I can only imagine no one in the capitalist elite wanted to reproduce, because with the black population you can imagine how much it would have cost. Which is where also I think the role of neoliberalism, which says you can have social policy as long as you don't tamper too much with the budget, right? Is something to come into play. The second thing was about, again, of course, your point, Rob, is very true, but I think it's, we may not want to think of development as an elite-driven process, but I think there's a reason why Northwest and why gas and Karl look at elite coalitions, is that often they are the things that determine other things. And perhaps to understand why this is the case, we need to remember that this is capitalism. I mean, as Marx wrote in his book on the French Revolution called On the Jewish Question, what the French Revolution did was it unleashed egoistic man. It didn't free people from religion or free them from property. It gave them the freedom to choose their religion, it gave